Okay. The question for the podcast is, what should an employer do if an employee fails to submit FMLA paperwork, for example, after being out of surgery for 2 weeks without turning in the medical certification?
So we've got the question is really retroactive designation when you knew about the information that was a potential qualifying event under FMLA and if the supervisor knew. So if we start from the beginning and the employee just took their vacation or their sick leave or their PTO and they went to surgery and you were not aware of it, and let's add another caveat, they went on vacation and they had a medical issue during vacation. And then when they came back, they informed you that they had a medical issue that's a qualifying FMLA event. You can retroactively designate that to FMLA. Do they have to provide a medical certificate if it's a FMLA qualifying event? No. If it's PTO, it's not going to be as impactful, but it would switch from vacation to sick leave. So it is beneficial to the employee. Now, we don't know if this employee was getting paid or not, and they were on a protected sick leave per se, or if they were not getting paid and they were on a protected FMLA leave or somehow they were using some other personnel policy and the organization is trying to apply FMLA. So in the case when an employee indicates to you that they are going out on a medical issue and you're the supervisor and you fail to inform the HR department and then HR finds out after they came back, that's not going to be eligible for retroactive leave designation because you knew, supervisor knew, there was a potential qualifying event. So the organization knew. So they're going to get a gift of those 2 weeks and they'll have all their FMLA to use. But in the case where you knew or didn't know that they were going up for surgery, they were going for a 2-week sick leave maybe, or 2 weeks of PTO, you can see that the question of how they're getting paid sort of clouds it a little bit. But let's just say they went on a 2-week sick leave, and then they told you later that that sick leave was a qualifying event under FMLA, but they never wanted to turn the medical documentation in. And that's what the beginning of the question was. What if they never turn in the medical documentation? So if an employee doesn't turn in the medical documentation, FMLA not only requires you to make sure you document the usage of FMLA leave, it allows you to designate qualifying events. You don't have to get a medical certificate. You're required mandatorily to protect employees with FMLA when they've got a qualifying medical event. So when you know or should have known, then we're designating FMLA. Now the question and the challenge with this is you now are creating a new standard operating procedure that you're designating people with FMLA even though they haven't provided a medical certificate. Okay, well then how do you use that as a justification for I'm terminating you now because you never provided a FMLA certificate, so I'm rolling you into ADA and you never provided that, and now you're terminating? It's a good question. I have never seen any litigation on this at all, even close to this. So I think that we probably have a little bit more flexibility in this area with HR than in other areas. But the real question is, when you know or should have known of a qualifying medical event under FMLA, send the designation letter. If you don't get it back after 7 days or 15 days, you can roll into ADA. If they still never get it back to you at that point, are you really terminating? And if you are, I'm not going to suggest you change that very conservative, very compliant procedure if it's done correctly. But if you're at FMLA and you know they're in the hospital, you've got this information, as opposed to it's questionable, so you're rolling into ADA after they don't comply with a couple of requests for these medical certificates. You can designate, because what's the harm? You're protecting the employee, you're protecting their job, and you're making sure they've got a job available at the end of 12 weeks. And then at the end of 12 weeks, if they still have never provided a medical certificate, but you have information to understand they have a qualifying event. And that would be the key here. They were in the hospital. We knew they were in the hospital. We're not guessing as to whether they even qualify. We know they qualify based on the information we have. It's responsible to protect employees when you know they qualify for a federal or state benefit. a little confusing, and it takes some of your own knowledge and understanding of how you want to act as an organization for those kinds of decisions. Very, very good question. Thank you, Maddie.
The rest of the question is, and you kind of talked about it, but it says, how does retroactive designation work in this situation? And what happens if the supervisor knew about the leave and did not inform HR in time?
Very clearly, how and when is it okay to retroactively designate FMLA leave or your state version of it? Only in the situation where you didn't find out until they returned from a leave. And then let's say they were on vacation and had a medical issue and they told you when they came back. You have 2 days to retroactively designate, change it from vacation to sick leave, for example. Same thing if they came back and they were on just regular sick leave or some other qualifying leave that they were on, and then they informed you of an event that qualified them for FEMLA. You have 2 days to retroactively designate. And the only reason you can do that is because you didn't know or you shouldn't have known. There was no way you could have known. That's a very clear understanding that that occurred. And it's usually a benefit to the employee in some way, but even if it isn't, you can still do it because you can require employees to utilize FEMLA when they qualify. That's why you can designate when you know or should have known they qualified. Now, if the advisor knew, though, that they were going to the hospital and having surgery and authorized the PTO or the sick leave and didn't inform HR or whomever the leave coordinator is, you knew or should have known because the organization knew or should have known. And therefore, you can't retroactively designate at that point. And I would just be giving them those 2 weeks, and now they've got 14 weeks of FEMLA. And of course, you protected them. And then from that point forward, you could then designate if they were still gone. That's a retroactive designation strategy. Thanks, Manny.
Perfect. Okay.